So we are in Ruth chapter 3. Just so you guys do know, we are going to be talking about a lot of different possible interpretations of some kind of controversial things throughout this passage. There's a lot of things that are sort of weird. That are very weird. I'm going to do my best, as per my usual, to give the different explanations and then tell you which one I think fits best and why I think it's the best fit. And I will, of course, invite you guys to share any additional thoughts and commentary because it's possible for us to really dive into the rabbit hole of, well, no, I really think eventually I may just say, okay, we're going to pause on this discussion and continue forward with the lesson. If that happens, just because there's just so much to get to, know that it's not you. It's just we have a lot to get to, and that we're not debating salvation. So it's just sort of all these fringe issues. So just keep that in mind as we're going through. So let's go ahead, start off Ruth chapter 3. We're going to start verses 1 to 2. Read it out loud, follow along either on the screen or in your Bibles. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, Ruth, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor." All right, so right off the bat, we see that Naomi is basically talking to Ruth and saying, hey, you're with me now, and it's time. Should I not seek rest with you, that it may be well with you? That phrase, seek rest for, is the same phrase that she uses earlier in Ruth chapter 1, whenever she's talking to Ruth and Orpah, saying, hey, shouldn't you guys, may the Lord bless you, that you may seek, that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her own husband. And so this is the same phrase, and this is the idea. She's saying, hey, if you're staying with me, I can't provide for you long term. I can't provide that place of security, that haven for you. I want you to be able to set up now and in the future. You're not going to be able to just glean forever. Eventually, I want you to have more security than this. So she says, hey, again, my daughters, it's that term of affection that she's using for Ruth, that familial term. It's not just, hey, you nice person. She's, again, identified Ruth as her family. So this is confirmed. Is not Boaz our relative? And it's interesting, the word that she uses for relative here isn't goel. It's not that Kinsman Redeemer word. It's a different word that really just implies that familial connection. So it's more inclusive of Ruth, and again, implying that sort of family feel than having a Kinsman Redeemer focus, which is interesting. We'll come back to that in just a second. Let's just take a broad sweep of it right off the bat. So she says, is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? So this is the introduction to Naomi's grand scheme, where she's essentially trying to set up Boaz and Ruth. And that's sort of the basis of what she's going into here, which we know from the rest of the passage. So my first question, sort of right off the bat, broadly speaking, is what the heck took her so long, right? Because remember, Ruth and Boaz, they met at the beginning or somewhere near the beginning of this harvesting period. And it's taken, as you remember last week, we talked about how it would have taken a month and a half to 2 months to gather both the barley harvest and the grain harvest. And so Naomi's had all this time to propose this grand scheme. Why at this point? And remember, at the end of chapter 2, the time cue is, and Ruth was with her mother-in-law and worked in Boaz's fields until the end of the harvests. And so now it's at this point, then, her mother-in-law said to her, hey, I have this great idea. So what's up with the timing here? Well, several things could answer it. It's possible that Naomi was just hoping that Boaz would take the initiative. And she was thinking, hey, Boaz, he's a redeemer. She's already noted this. We know that already back in chapter 2, she's making all these great connections and hoping that, oh, the Lord has orchestrated this whole thing. Boaz, Ruth, we're going to be set. And she's already sort of like, beyond what's required by law. She's set up this whole thing in her mind. And again, this passage helps to confirm that that's sort of what she's thinking. But obviously Boaz didn't. So, maybe she was hoping Boaz would go ahead and pull the trigger. Why didn't he? Maybe Boaz was just busy in the fields, and Naomi thought, hey, he's busy in the fields. He's taking care of the harvest. He's got to get that harvest in. That's where his focus is. And he's sort of like, yeah, protect Ruth, but, focus in on the harvest. It's a possibility. Kelly Minter and a couple of other commentators floated a suggestion that Ruth was still wearing her widow's garments this entire time, and so sort of putting off the signal of, I'm not interested, I'm still in mourning, don't talk to me, I'm not interested. That is a possible suggestion. I will continue to return to this because it does connect in to other, like the interpretation does, it's not just, oh, well, this explains one thing. It does pop up multiple times throughout the passage. I personally don't really resonate with that explanation because there's just nothing else in the passage that seems to support that. Like, there's nothing else in the passage that points to that being the answer. But it's possible. So, it's possible. It's possible that Boaz is like, oh, she doesn't want me to say anything. She doesn't want me to approach her. Another possibility for why Boaz didn't take any initiative here is that there is a kinsman redeemer who is more closely related to Ruth and Naomi than Boaz is. And we're going to really take a look at that next week whenever we finish off chapter 3. So there's this other dude that Boaz knows is more closely related, and so he knows that whatever steps he might take, the other guy actually has a stronger claim and first dibs. Yeah.
So wouldn't Naomi have known that?
It's possible. It's possible not, though. Mm-hmm. Because remember, she was out and gone for 10 plus years. And she comes back, and, I mean, remember, she sort of strides into the town scene, and she's all like, I'm so bitter, and, sort of puts off this pushing away front. And it's not until Ruth goes out into the field and says, hey, I was working in the field of Boaz, and that Naomi's like, oh my gosh, right, I have a kinsman named Boaz. Oh, he's one of our redeemers. And, she doesn't make any connection to relatives until that point in the narrative. So it's possible that she knew. It's possible she didn't.
Yeah, because she wasn't necessarily going out to the local hangout to talk to people, right? And how did you get news back then? Mm-hmm. By talking to people, right? That's the only way that she would have known who was still alive.
And who was single.
Right.
Right, who's available. It's possible, too, that there's a lot of possible layers of complexity with this. It's possible that during this time, Naomi is sort of doing her reconnaissance and sort of figuring out, who's out there, who's available. Well, this other dude's here, but he's not really that great. Maybe he, so it's possible that the other guy was in fact married because, as we'll again take a look at later, this is going to be in chapter 4, the other guy who could be the kinsman redeemer, says no to marrying Ruth because it will endanger his own inheritance, meaning that his kids, any children that would be born, like, it wouldn't stay in his family. The land would go back to Mahlon, Ruth, and their descendants, and it wouldn't be with his family. And so it's possible that Naomi's just like, he's not even a possible factor in this equation. And in a few minutes, we're going to dive into the whole legal aspect of the Levirate marriage and the kinsman redeemer and how these two things are coming into play in the story. Because that's another complicating factor, is that they are two separate things, but they seem to be really closely related in this narrative. So we'll get to that in a minute, and that may help explain it more as well. It's a really good question, though. Anybody else have any other thoughts on that?
I was just kind of
Yes, ma'am.
hoping that Naomi was waiting for the green light from God. Like, if she was praying about this, she might have had her plan, but you know what I'm saying? Had she hurried up and tried to make a match, it could have messed up the whole thing ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we clearly see that it works out. So God's sovereign hand is working throughout this whole narrative. And what factors went into all of that? Lots of factors go into all of that, right? And so we're hoping and seeing that Naomi's faith is growing throughout this entire time, and she's being strengthened in her faith, and she's getting more and more confident. And again, we're going to see that possibly even in another moment here. I want to point out one final thing that's a possibility for why Boaz, I'll come to you in just a second, is that a hand?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come to you in a second. That Boaz doesn't make any moves on Ruth is that she is young and he is not. And so, again, it's even highlighted again right here. Is not Boaz our relative whose young women you were with? Okay, I was like, with where? With sometimes proper English is very difficult to speak. With whose young women you were. And so he may not have even considered himself as a possible option for Ruth. You know, he calls her my daughter. It's really almost a fatherly expression of kindness and compassion toward her. We're going to see again next week that he's just flabbergasted that she would even approach him, and he's like, me? But you also see like that he's been thinking about this. He knows that there's a Kinsman Redeemer. So it's possible that just that age difference was enough that he's not going to take a step here and initiate the whole conversation. Again, there's legal complexities too with the levirate marriage and the Kinsman Redeemer aspect, which we'll get into a little bit later. Junior, what was your question or comment?
Just to throw out thought that maybe Naomi was waiting, if she knew enough about this whole cultural thing,
Mm-hmm.
and if she already had the scheme in her, if you want to call it that, in her head,
Mm-hmm.
she may have known that at that time of year,
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, the owner of the field would stay in his threshing field and sleep. And then knowing the custom and how Ruth would have to approach him at his feet, that it would be like the perfect timing. Right.
Yeah, and even thinking about, in a moment we'll see that, you know, there's all these festivities with whenever you bring in the harvest and you have this threshing thing, that it's a time of celebration, there's a little bit of partying going down. We're going to see that Boaz's heart is all light and cheerful. And so, again, in contrast with the grind of you've got to get out in the field, you've got to get that harvest in, to then the, oh, it's all done, we got it all in. There's a different emotional context, but then the actual situation of, and again, we'll get to it all in a moment, of, you know, there's cover for Ruth, there's an opportunity here, really sets it up as an opportunity instead of, well, why did you wait so long? Like, this is perhaps the opportunity that she was indeed waiting for. Good thought, Junia. Note on timing. So whenever, at this, in the Jewish sort of harvesting season, how they did it is they would gather all of the harvest from both the barley and the wheat, and then they would thresh it all out. And this is in contrast to somebody who's just gleaning. Remember, we saw that Ruth, whenever she gleaned, she beat out her stuff right away, and then she took it home. It's the difference between living paycheck to paycheck and having a savings account. So, you know, these guys, the ones who own the fields, the ones who are working in the fields, have last year's harvest to be able to continue to be feeding them during this time. They don't need to beat it all out right away to live on right that second, whereas Ruth and Naomi did. They didn't have any harvest to live off of. They needed it for today. And so for Ruth, she needed to go beat it out, take it home so that they could use it immediately. These guys, they can like, oh, we're just going to leave it in the sheaves. It's fine. It's all good. And then they would go ahead, beat it out. That's the threshing part. And then the winnowing is whenever they would actually heft it all up into the air. Remember, we had that picture of the guys with those winnowing forks tossing it into the air so that the wind would blow and separate the chaff from those grand old kernels of barley and wheat. Let's back up a little bit and take a look again at what Naomi says to Ruth. My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with whose young woman you were? Couple of things here. First of all, what's the emphasis on here? Who's the emphasis on? Whose well-being?
Oh, Ruth.
Ruth's. It's all about Ruth. Naomi's heart condition has radically shifted. At the end of chapter 1, it's all focused on her. It's all about what is she lost, what has she suffered, and now her focus is outward. It's on Ruth and seeking her well-being. Notice that it's even a progression from the end of chapter 2 where she's thinking about, hey, the Lord hasn't forgotten, the living or the dead, because she's thinking, oh, well, maybe, if Kinsman Redeemer, we can connect this all together. The line of Elimelech can continue forward. So, this whole thing's going to work out and, maybe you're going to be okay. But she's even now thinking, hey, my focus is on security and well-being for Ruth. Now, I'll come to you in just a second, Miss Margaret. And it's true. I think that it's impossible for us to say that Naomi didn't have in her mind the hope that it would work out with Boaz so that the line would continue, so that the line of Elimelech would continue. Because otherwise, if Ruth just gets married to Joe down the street, then at least it'll be well with Ruth while she's alive, but then she dies and the line of Elimelech ends. That's the end. And for the Israelites, this is a really, 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 really big deal. For her name to continue was huge. And then, the land would get absorbed into other parts of the clan, and it was going to be devastating. So I think it's impossible for us to say that she wasn't thinking about it, but her focus here, her outward focus, is just on Ruth's well-being. Ms. Margaret.
You answered it.
I answered.
Wow, nice.
Because I'm thinking, Naomi, if this plan works out, it helps Naomi too.
Absolutely. And I think that can't we all attest to having some mixed motives in our lives, but we're able to direct that to the focus of helping somebody. You're like, well, this could work out well for me. And you have all of these things that you're like, yeah, well, if I do this, then I'll look good and, people will like me and whatever. But you're able to sort of push that aside and we're able to say, but I'm going to choose to do it, not for my own reasons, but I'm going to choose to do it because it helps this person. And I'm going to choose to do it and decide that I would do it even if it had no benefit for me. And I really think that that's what we see Naomi doing here, especially because of the use of the word relative and not redeemer. Because, again, if she had said redeemer, then I think that it would be hard to say that she's not thinking along the lines of, oh, well, we can continue the line of Elimelech. But using the word relative is really just that sort of more familiar family word that points our attention away from the Kinsman Redeemer aspect and more toward the fact that Naomi is looking for a place of rest and refuge for Ruth, which I just think is really cool. It's that heart shift that we see in her journey of faith, that she's now not just focused so solely on herself, that she's able to focus her attention completely on Ruth and her well-being. So, looking at the second part here, is not Boaz our relative with whose young woman you were? Of course, duh. What? So this is basically just Naomi saying a great old rhetorical question, drawing attention to the fact that, of course, yes, duh, Boaz is the person that you've been with this whole time. And she's sort of, the narrator's bringing up, reminding us of the kindness that Boaz has shown to Ruth this whole time. It's been a couple months. He's been gracious. He's been faithful to protect her, to provide for her, been with the woman, provided a community. He's made it great for her. He's the relative. So he's got both the I'm a relative, I can make this thing work out for you aspect, and the I'm a great dude aspect, where if either of those were missing, the situation really wouldn't work out. So this is just a real quick boom, highlight, recap, rhetorical device to help remind us, hey, this is what's going down here. Let's briefly talk about the relationship between the Mosaic Kinsman Redeemer, the Mosaic law thing about the Kinsman Redeemer, and the Levirate marriage. So, remember we said that the Levirate marriage is, so Joe marries Sue. Joe dies. Joe's brother, John, then in the law would say, John, you marry Sue. The kids that you have with her will continue on with Joe's name so that Joe's line doesn't die. So that's the levirate marriage. Kinsman Redeemer is more about keeping the land in the family, selling people, keeping people up from being enslaved. It's more of a protection for, keeping people out of poverty and out of slavery, keeping the land in the family. It seems that in this time, these two practices became traditionally enmeshed together. And we see that even as with Ruth 4, chapter 4, verse 5, in which Boaz says to that kinsman redeemer, possible, the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. So it looks like it had become the tradition to require the levirate marriage of the redeemer, of the portion of the deceased relative, not only that the land of possession might stay in the family, but also that the family itself may continue and not basically come to an end. So, again, it made sense to them to say, hey, if there's only the widow and, you buy the land back, that's great and all, but, if the land's going to end anyway, so the fact that you bought the land back didn't really do anything for them. So it seems like it had become a tradition to link these two together. So it wasn't a strict requirement, but it had become the tradition of the time, it seems, that if you decided to redeem, not that you were required to, but if you decided to redeem, then you were also to marry the widow. So there's not a definite requirement for them to do this, but if you did do it, then the marriage was also linked to it. Miss Crystal.
I remember studying this, and if I'm not mistaken, again, I don't have my book with me today, but Kelly Minter made it sound almost as if the first possibility of a kinsman redeemer was being disobedient. And I thought that's kind of a stretch of the truth, because I didn't think that it was something that he absolutely had to do. He could do it if he felt so inclined to do so. But
Correct.
Yes. Wasn't obligated to do.
Right. And I think that's because they had complicated the law to beyond just redeeming it, to linking the two things together in this particular time frame. Where again, originally the law is just, hey, you're a kinsman, you have the obligation to, if your relative gets off, you go down and chase down the murderer. If they're sold into slavery, you have the responsibility to buy them out of it. If they lose their land, you have that responsibility and privilege to be able to buy that land back. But they linked those two customs together with that levirate marriage. And so, culturally speaking, I think that he did bear some of that disgrace, but under the law, he didn't. Because legally speaking, he did not have a legal responsibility to marry Ruth. But under the custom, where they had linked those two together, I think that there was some disgrace in there. Now, I don't think that it went as far as Kelly Minter put it out to be, but I think that there was some, But
did you see that also?
Yeah.
When you were reading
Yeah,
through it?
definitely. Yep. Mm-hmm. It's a good observation. Good. So, guys, we have finished part of verse 2. Let's continue forward. So, see, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. This is very interesting. So why tonight? What's up with the whole tonight thing? Well, turns out that in this culture, there are a couple of things about Israel. First of all, y'all know it's really hot in Israel during the day. Oh my gosh, hot. So it's super hot. Evenings, a lot cooler, a lot easier to work in the evening. Secondly, the gusts of wind throughout the day became much more reliable in the evening. So it was the habit of people to winnow their barley, and again, that's the tossing it up into the air so that it would separate. They would do this process in the evening so that it was easier to get the whole thing done, because again, those winds were more reliable. So evening usually starts around 5, 6, so around dinner time, they're going out in the field and they're winnowing the barley. Now, one more note before we move on. And this helps tie things together too. So, once you finish bringing in the harvest, then you move to the winnowing. So, the harvest is over, which means that Ruth is no longer gleaning. Ruth is now home with Naomi. So, it's also possible that Naomi's like, I'm here with you all the time now. I need to get you out of the house. But even more, like, you know, sometimes you're aware of somebody's presence, and then the fact, whenever somebody's with you all the time, you see everything, you're like, oh, I really need to take care of you, because that need is so much more immediate, because you're with that present, you're just present with the person all the time. And so, it's possible, it is possible, I'm not going to say absolutely for certain, it's possible that Ruth had developed some level of affection and attraction for Boaz. Again, I don't want to read all the romance in, because our culture is so infatuated with the whole romance angle. It's not presented heavily in the text, so I'm gonna try not to read it in, but it is possible that you know, there was attachment there, and so Ruth is like, you know, a little bit sulky, maybe a little bit sort of like down in the heart. You know, who knows? I don't know. For whatever reason, again, Naomi now, at this point, proposes the plan. Hey, Boaz, winnowing tonight at the threshing floor. We're moving forward. We are. Finally. Verse 3. Only verse 3. Wash therefore, and anoint yourself. Put on your cloak. Go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then, go, uncover his feet, and lie down. He will tell you what to do. And she replied, all you say I will do. Okay. I love their interactions. Ruth just makes me laugh. So, let's start at the top here. Naomi gives a list of instructions for Ruth. First one seems fairly obvious. Wash. Get cleaned up. You know, you've been working in the fields. Stop smelling terrible. For us, washing is a lot more sort of whole body and regular than it was in the Israelite culture. Now, they did wash frequently because they're out in the dust all the time, but it was usually more limited to feet. Remember Jesus and the disciples saying, hey, if you just wash your feet, your whole body's clean. You know, they stuck feet in people's faces whenever they lay down, so, you know, washing those feet was super important. Water resources were really limited, so unless you lived right next to the river, then, again, your resources are more limited. You may have a couple of dirty washes with, you know, the one bucket of water. So it's not, you know, if you're thinking of washing, it's not exactly taking a shower. But, so she specifically says, hey, get good and cleaned up. Get that grain scent off of you. Anoint yourself. This is the perfume deodorant combo of the day. So they didn't have anything that we have these days. So this is essentially make yourself smell good. Very basically boiled down. Put on your cloak. This is one of those phrases that is sort of up for debate here. One possible explanation is change out of those widow's garments, the thing that we mentioned earlier, so change into your best garments. Again, it's possible. There's nothing else in the text to really make that seem like that's exactly what's going on, but it's possible. It's a possible read. It doesn't say, you know, take off your widow's clothes and put on your nice garments. Just one possible interpretation of the phrase is put on your best garments. The actual reading of this is put on your outer garment. So to me, in my mind, she's saying, on the first hand, it's going to be cold out because the wind's going to be blowing. It's a desert environment, so the temperatures do drop pretty rapidly in the evenings. So it's going to be cold. Put on a jacket. Just put on your jacket. Secondly, Ruth is about to embark on a mission impossible. All right, she's going on stealth mode. So she says, do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. Hide, okay? don't let yourself be known. So, in order to be able to conceal yourself, if you show up in the same outfit that you've been showing up in for the past 2 months, because guess what? They don't have changes of clothes like we do. Boaz is going to be able to pick her out and be able to see her. So, put on the garment to hide yourself and then go down to the threshing floor. The second interpretation combo, that, keep yourself warm and stay hidden, is what I gravitate toward. If you really like the widow's garment explanation, you can run with it. It's possible. I do gravitate toward that second explanation there. Next, go down to the threshing floor. You're like, go down? I thought you said it was on a hill, Mariah. Yes, but the city itself is actually on a bigger hill. So cities were always built on raised mounds, usually with some fortification. This is just what they did in order to stay safe. So anytime, if they set up a city, it would be on whatever raised ground there was. So anything that you went to then, you had to go out and down. Even if the place you were going to was then up a little bit from there, you had to go down out of the city to get to the threshing floor. So again, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go down and cover his feet, lie down, he'll tell you what to do. So we're going to take a look in a second at what Boaz actually does. But so there was going to be these festivities, they're going to be celebrating, eating and drinking. It seems like Naomi is anticipating that this is all going to put Boaz in a good mood. And so she's saying, hey, wait until he's finished eating and drinking. Let him be in a happy mood. And she doesn't just say, hey, whenever he's in a good mood, go ahead up to him at the party and say, hey, so Boaz, got a proposition for you. She then goes and says, wait until he lies down. Make sure you take note. Don't go, don't mess up. Take good notes. See where he's lying down. And then uncover his feet, lie down, he'll tell you what to do. So, at this time period, several people have mentioned already, heard going around the room, it was customary that the owner of the field would go and lie down in the threshing area whenever they were finished to prevent theft of all of this very freshly winnowed out grain, because it was valuable. I mean, you could sell it. It makes money. It seems likely that servants were with him, sleeping with him. It just doesn't make sense to me for Naomi to propose all of this stealth and sort of secrecy, and for Boaz to be so concerned, as we'll see next week, if there weren't other people also in the area. So it seems very likely to me that servants were there as well. So, and observe the place where he lies. Don't get him confused with the foreman or somebody else. Wake up and she's like, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake. So, right. So observe the place where he lies. Then go uncover his feet, lie down. He'll tell you what to do. Guys, this section right here. There's a lot here. Here are basically the possible interpretations. Some people, so here's the thing. Most commentators don't actually think that anything was weird going on here. They just say, hey, it's possible for this to be interpreted in this crazy way. We don't think it is, and this is why. So no commentator that I read suggested that this was actually what I'm about to explain to you guys. They all think, hey, this is a possible interpretation. We don't think this is correct, from what I read. There may be some out there, but nothing that I read was like, we think this is right. So, several phrases in here can be read with a sexual connotation. So, lying down, uncovering, and then feet can all be interpreted as a sexual thing. So, lying down with somebody can be interpreted, have sex with somebody. Feet can be interpreted as just the lower regions of the body. So it's possible to read that as, basically just pull the whole thing up, yo. And then if you, there's phrases in the Bible like uncover his nakedness. So that's another phrase that shows up in scripture. But while there's a possibility that you can interpret it that way, there's literally zero reason for us to read it like that. First of all, if Naomi wanted it to be very, very plain that she wanted Ruth to do something like propose sex to Boaz, she would have used, there are lots of more specific words that she could have used to be a lot more direct and explicit. Like, for example, the word feet, again, it's almost always used for just the lower half almost always referencing as, in contrast to your upper half, where is your head and your upper body. Just lower half, pull it up so that his feet are exposed. That makes sense. And then thinking about, so if Naomi is really proposing, Ruth, I want you to go, and my grand plan for you to find rest and security is to go have sex with Boaz so that you will hopefully get pregnant and then have a son from that. Lots of problems here. First of all, we know that Ruth she didn't have kids prior to this, so what are the chances that there's going to be a one-off and, that she's going to be able to have kids? Unlikely. Possible, but not completely likely. There's nothing in what she says to Ruth about progeny, about a continuation. She's looking for that security. Remember, she used the same phrasing as back in chapter 1, whenever she's saying, hey, find rest in the house of a husband, not in the future of kids, in the house of your husband. So she's looking for that security of a foundational relationship. Next, so the narrator is making a really big point of highlighting the faith and the character of these women. Remember, we said at the beginning, when we introduced the whole story of Ruth, that the emphasis of the story, one of the main things, was highlighting the faith of people in contrast to the surrounding days of the judges, in which everybody did whatever they thought was right in the eyes, their own eyes. These characters are honoring the Lord. And so we're drawing a contrast here, not aligning them to them. So again, for them to say, do this crazy immoral thing, isn't in line with what the narrator is doing with the rest of the story. Finally, if this was the thing that they were up to, and Ruth does this, right? She does all these steps. And we'll see in chapter 3 that Boaz praises Ruth for what she does. And he calls her, everybody knows you're a noble woman, you're a woman of character. Would he have done that if she was trying to just get sex off of him? No. It's absurd. All right? So, that's a nonsense explanation when I'm going to consider it. So, what does it mean? What does it mean? A couple possibilities here. My favorite interpretation is essentially that it was a clever way to get Boaz to wake up in the middle of the night, because, again, it's cold. And so if you uncover I don't know if you guys have ever been asleep and, everyone's just sort of, somebody pulls the covers off of you, or your foot just sort of happens to slide out, and then you wake up, and because you were cold, because the covers are no longer on you, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm frigid. And so my sort of favorite easy explanation is just that this is Naomi's clever way to make sure that Boaz wakes up before the morning. We know that he does wake up. He does get startled. So I do like that explanation. It's also, you can also understand it that this tied with this is how Naomi is going to, she's setting Ruth up for the proposal. And I'm going to leave that explanation hanging there, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that in just a moment. So this is the setup for the proposal. And notice she says, and he will tell you what to do. So again, we don't see Naomi giving very, very explicit instructions, and I think that part of that is really just Naomi's leaving it in the hands of God. And she's saying, hey, this is the setup. Jesus, take the wheel. And she's just like, and she has seen God's hand getting this far. And so now she's like, you know what? I prayed for Ruth to find a husband, and now now I'm really invested in it. And this is a possibility. This seems like this will work. I'm going to take the step. I'm going to take that next step. And if this is the Lord's will, it'll happen. And I'm just going to set it up and then hope that it works out. And again, I just love Ruth's reply here. She's just like, okay, whatever. I'll do what you say, Naomi. But again, it's just that faith, that loyalty where Ruth is saying, I'll do it. Whatever you say, I'll do it. So she, being Ruth, went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law commanded her. So again, Ruth is all in. She's going for it. Whole hog. She's going to do it. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry. So, I was wondering, so is Boaz, stone drunk here, or, what's going down? It's probable that he did drink some wine. Like, what was he drinking? Probably wine. In this culture, water was not great to drink because they had trouble making it clean. So probably he drank some wine, he ate some good food, and the phrase "his heart was merry" really just sort of can have the twofold meaning of, so yeah, maybe he was a little bit, ooh, I got some good wine, but also, like, he had just, he was satisfied with his work, grateful for the blessing from the Lord. Have you ever just finished a project or done a really good job cleaning your kitchen, and you come to the end of it and you're like, that was good work. That was a good job, Yeah. And so that's sort of the idea here. There's nothing here that says Boaz was doing anything immoral, that he was, completely, again, stone drunk out of his mind. But just that he'd eaten, he'd enjoyed himself, he'd worked hard, and now he was enjoying the fruit of his labor. So I think that's the best interpretation of that phrase. So he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. So we're seeing Ruth has taken note. It seems like he had laid down basically as far away as possible from wherever she was, which is kind of funny. You're like, she has to sneak over. Again, so then she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Lancaster Bible College did a production of Ruth, and one of the scenes that I did really enjoy was showing Ruth sort of sneaking all over the men and being like, and then like tripping, and then men waking up and she lies down, and it's sort of entertaining. But I mean, of course, for her, like, again, this is like Mission Impossible here, right? So she's in super stealth mode. She's going through. She is trying really hard not to get spotted here. So again, we're gonna pause on what exactly this was. Come back to it in just a second. Let's get to these last verses here. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over. And then behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." There's so much here. So, first of all, at midnight. So the first time, in fact, probably every time that I've read Ruth up until this point, in my head, I'm picturing hours and hours of waiting for Ruth, because I'm thinking they went to bed at like a normal hour, so like, 9 or something, 8:30, and then midnight, okay, so several hours later. However, remember, they started work at like 5 or 6, and then they partied, and then they lay down. So, was she waiting for that long? I don't think so. I don't think that it was as long as I had previously pictured it inside my head. However, I am perfectly convinced that every single moment was pure agony. So I'm thankful to her that it wasn't longer. But so at midnight, the man was startled and turned over. Now, to me, I think, well, why was he startled? What startled him? I'm thinking that it was because his feet were uncovered and the wind woke him up. But that is my personal thing. The text doesn't tell us what he was startled by. Maybe he heard Ruth breathing. Who knows? So he turned over, and behold! I love the phrase behold. And behold, look, pay attention. A woman lay at his feet. In this time period, it was possible for prostitutes to come and make appearances in the threshing areas. A lot of pagan fertility rites were associated with sexual practices. For them, it made, so they affiliated fertility of the body with fertility in the fields, with that flourishing. And so to them, it somehow made sense to sleep with a prostitute of the god or goddess of fertility, and that would somehow link to your crops and make those fertile. And it doesn't make sense to me, but hey, we do crazy things these days too, and make all sorts of weird sacrifices to materialism, to things, to our status. So it was weird. It's weird to me, but to them it made sense. So prostitutes would come and do this crazy thing. So Boaz wakes up. There's a woman at his feet. He's like, "Oh, who are you? Who are you?" Kelly Minter makes a big deal about the question, "Who are you?" in contrast to the first question that he asks Ruth, "To whom do you belong?" To whom does she belong? The contexts are completely different, and he doesn't know that it's Ruth here. So I can't attribute any sort of development of Boaz of like, oh, first he regarded her as just a possession, and now he's regarding her as a person. That's not what's going on here. It's just a completely different context. So he needs to ask a different question. But so he asks, who are you? The implied follow-up is, and what in the world are you doing here in my field at the middle of the night, lying at my feet? What are you doing? So he's asking, who are you, implied, and why? Why are you here? Notice he doesn't just immediately kick her out. He wants to know. He's, again, God-honoring man. He wants to know what's going on. She answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. So, first of all, she answers the basic question. I'm Ruth, so, you know me, exactly. She says, your servant. It's really interesting. The word she uses for servant is ama. The word that she uses for herself in chapter 2, whenever she says, hey, you're treating me like a servant, even though I'm not one of your servants, is the word sifa, which is so the sifa is remember that lowest ranking of servant, whereas ama is like your handmaiden. So it's a higher level of servant. It's still a servant, but it's just interesting. So she has become more secure in her relationship with Boaz. She says, this is who I am in relation to you, which invites the question, well, who are you in relationship to me? So there's an interesting thing, because this doesn't really add anything to the answer. Like, she could have said, I'm Ruth, period, and stopped there, but she says, your servant. And again, that's just sort of an interesting rhetorical device that invites that question of, so this is my current relationship to you, what's your relationship to me? Guys, this part right here is the most beautiful thing in the world. So, spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. The phrase, spread your wings, as you guys have probably read at this point, has multiple explanations, multiple interpretations. The word wings is knap in Hebrew. It can also be translated skirt. So we remember back in chapter 2, verse 12, verses 11 and 12, where Boaz prays for Ruth, and he says, hey, may you be blessed, for you have sought refuge, in the Lord, under whose wings you have gone to find refuge. And that's that same word. Refuge, wings, is just that word. Knap, skirt. And remember, we said, hey, Boaz is praying that reward, that blessing, that protection from the Lord there, and he's already operating as those wings, as that protection, as that refuge. And here, Ruth brings that phrase right on back and says, hey, you prayed for that refuge, for that protection for me under the wings of Yahweh, become those wings yourself. She's openly inviting for him to be that refuge for her. That's the first level of wow. Second level of wow is that in this culture, a common picture or idiom for marriage would be for a man to spread his garment over the woman. It's a sort of symbolic representation of provision and protection, to spread a garment over. And so, whenever Ruth uncovered his feet and left it off to the side, she's saying, hey, this blanket over here that is now right here, spread that over me, to be able to say, she's proposing. She is indeed proposing, okay? So, it's really cool. So I think that, again, remember back at the beginning, we said, what is exactly Naomi suggesting with the whole uncovering the feet thing? Callie Minter says that Ruth took it a step further than Naomi intended. I don't think she did. I think that Naomi is intending to set up proposal just like that, with the uncovering of the feet, to set up Ruth to go ahead and ask for that protection of that skirt, of that blanket. And Ruth just sort of steps right in and says, spread that skirt over me. Take me as your wife. You are a redeemer. All right? And she's not saying you are the redeemer. She's saying you have the opportunity. You have an opportunity to redeem me, and then to fulfill the customary obligation to marry. Spread your wings over your servant. You are a redeemer. What happens? We have to find out next week, guys. That's it. That's it.